So welcome everybody to the panel discussion on product traceability through a reusable packaging platform. We have experts here from companies that serve this space, and uh, the idea around this panel is to talk about how traceability of products through the supply chain has increased in importance, mostly over the last year or so, dealing with the COVID crisis. There's been a lot more attention paid to this as companies are shipping medicines and vaccines and protective gear around. And so the traceability aspects have become more important. And some of the data shows that it's actually increased the adaptability of that technology by several times and sort of accelerated the acceptance of traceability technology. We're here to talk about reusable packaging specifically as part of the Reusable Packaging Association's offering here. So first, I just thought we should introduce ourselves, and then we'll get into a few questions and take it from there. So I'm moderating the panel. My name is Sean Stockman. I'm with OnePack. OnePack is a platform company that really is involved in a circular economy where we have a technology ecosystem that ranges from handheld mobile apps to IoT devices to an online cloud-based platform where all stakeholders in a reverse logistics or loop logistics process can see the data around the movement of goods through a loop or a circular process. So we'll go on to some of the other companies. We can start with NimbleLink with Scott. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, so Scott Schwabe with NimbleLink, an airgain company. At NimbleLink, we're really focused on the edge communication devices, building and designing battery-powered autonomous devices that can actually track materials that go indoors and outdoors through licensed cellular networks that actually drive to the capability and drive the data for traceability. So looking forward to being part of the panel.
Great. And we have another Scott from Roamby. Would you want to take it next?
Hey, Sean. My name is Scott Hurley, and I'm with Roamby, where I lead our product marketing and strategy groups. And Roamby is a real-time supply chain visibility company where we use IoT sensors in combination with our platform and apps to track and monitor both shipments as well as the critical supply chain assets that are used to move shipments as well.
Great. And next we have Tim from Smart Logistics.
Hi, Sean. Smart Logistics is an asset tracking company, and we're specifically focused on using reusable packaging and the assets employed to keep track of the assets themselves as well as products.
Great. All right. Well, so in our research for this, we sort of discovered that there's a lot of different ways of looking at traceability and a lot of definitions of that. So I know each of us have sort of we're coming at it from a slightly different approach. Maybe we should start just to level set what we all think from our approach, what we think traceability really means. I think it is a little bit distinct from trackability or monitoring, where someone might want to know the location of something, but traceability kind of goes beyond that, where it can mean a few other things. How about we start with just what does traceability mean to you as far as products and reusable packaging goes? Tim, you want to start with that?
Sure. When I think of traceability, I really think of the compliance aspect typically, or chain of custody. So I think of where a product has been on a journey. And so I think of like food supply and medicine supply, where it's really critical that that the life of the journey of the product is essentially recorded, so that if you've got a problem with food, that they can track back to where the problem came, or medicine, or what have you. I think of blockchain and sort of giving giving multiple entities the ability to see the life journey, if you can call it that, of a given product. And reusable packaging is particularly useful with things like that, because it allows it usually it stays with a product over through multiple waypoints, if you will, and make it kind of an ideal way to keep track of something like that. And also reusable packaging, by its nature as reusable, is often more durable than a disposable packaging, for example. So it makes sense to invest in the infrastructure necessary to do that kind of tracking. So that's what I think of with traceability. I think bigger picture, there's sort of knowing where one package or one part of a shipment, a pallet, for example, has been, is valuable. But over time, I think it's really going to be more about the flow of goods and what's actually happening in the supply chain, where you can see the velocity, maybe even get demand cues based on where a large sample of shipments are going. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Oh, you're on mute there, Sean. So why don't I just jump in? I want to add to that a little bit, if you don't mind. So as in addition, and Tim made really good points on that chain of custody where the product is. I also see a lot of industries like us are really looking at knowing the condition of their assets as it's moving around for traceability. Is it staying within the temperature range or the humidity range? Are there things going on with the asset as it's moving along? If you look in the food industry, if there's going to be recalls for anything, can you determine where it might have been contaminated or where something happened to it? So you can be predictive, actually saying, wow, here, as we're tracing this, it looks like we're going to have an issue in the supply chain, and it's not going to be good when it gets there. You can actually start building or getting more product getting ready to ship, instead of waiting until after it arrives and then inspecting it. So there might be early indicators that we're seeing that the industry is really taking advantage of in this traceability. So I think that's just an additive area that we're seeing in the field.
Right, and this is Scott, just to expand on that. I think there's a couple of interesting ways that reusable packaging, reusable assets can be part of the traceability story. First one would be most or many shipments are tracked at, say, the container or the trailer or the truck level. And through the use of reusable assets that can be much smaller in size, whether it's a bin or a tray or a tote, or depends on what the industry is, you can actually get a much smaller item level. And as you are transporting goods, if those goods, say on air cargo, get segregated, if you're only tracking at the container or the truck level, you no longer have real traceability for all of your shipments anymore. And so through the use of IoT or other tracking technologies with the reusable packaging, you are able to be much more confident that you do have traceability for the entirety of the shipment. And then the other aspect is around contamination. I think when we think of traceability, we think about where something may be grown or produced, and then we need to know where it was as it's being moved. But there's also the potential for, depending on what usable packaging you're using, that if it wasn't properly cleaned or humidity was removed, et cetera, you could be introducing contaminants into whatever you're moving as well. So understanding the location, or as Scott talked about, the condition of those reusable assets can be also important part of the story for verifying traceability in quality of product.
Yeah, that's a good segue. When you talk about either the time of contamination or the time where temperature may have gotten above a certain level, or humidity was exceeding the limit, or even knowing at the carton level or case level when it left the vehicle or left a pallet, then you're starting to get into some of the finer distinctions of technology which allow you to do that. So we're talking about sensors, what can sense humidity or temperature or movement. You're talking about ways they connect to the reusable package itself. I know, in the cannabis industry, for example, they might have a pallet full of cartons, and they need to know when each carton gets delivered at a retail store. So they might have a sensor on the pallet, but they have, or they might have an IoT device on the pallet, but a sensor on every carton. And as soon as it leaves the area of the pallet, you know it got delivered. And then, there could be another way to know that it went to that particular store. So what intrigues me about that is that you're talking about Bluetooth and IoT and all kinds of sensors that connect that way. Let's talk a little bit about the tech ecosystem that really supports all this. And I know that when we were first researching this several years ago, it was sort of baffling how many different kinds of devices and connections and data flows to generate the data that someone might want out of a solution. Um, Scott Hurley, I know that you've, or Scott Schwabe, I know that you've done some pretty good work in this area, and I wondered if you wanted to start just by kind of giving what you think is the basics of the tech ecosystem that someone should be considering when they're looking at doing this.
Sure, I can start out because obviously, um, if you think of the system going from the edge of collecting the data, and then creeping up all the way through the user interface to the application into the software platforms, we need it all because but I'll talk specifically about the edge and what we see going on in trends in the industry, and then let somebody else talk about the platforms and the cloud. Obviously, we just finished up last week at the PAC Expo. A lot of people from the Reusable group was there, and technologies like RFID have been around for a long time, and been using RFID, and it's inexpensive. But once from a traceability point of view, once the package or the reusable package leaves the building, totally lose capability for full cycle traceability. And that's where some of now with the technology of the low power wide area networks, if it's cellular, if it's LoRa, or some other technologies, have the ability to have devices which actually have radios to communicate while the device is indoors or outdoors, moving around to various locations. So we're seeing more and more reusable packaging to putting distinct cellular trackers or distinct LoRaWAN trackers on them. When I say trackers, obviously some condition monitoring and so forth. Also looking at some, where some of the trucks might have a gateway or ability to have a sensor where they can actually track BLE tags as the packages come on and off the vehicle, or what we might call swarming, where you might have a cellular gateway or a cellular mobile access point on one of the or on the pallet, and then you have multiple Bluetooth devices. So there's the technology is here today to actually drive that traceability from the factory to the warehouse, driving across the United States or moving across the seas, and then knowing where it is. It's just a matter of selecting that technology for your application in the specific vertical that you're working in. So it's exciting today because it's there. It's and then maybe either Tim or Scott, if you want to talk a little bit about that, and then a little about where the data goes in the ecosystem of traceability.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Scott from Romby. I think yeah, these are all tools that are means to an end, and it's useful to not think of one as better than another. They all serve different purposes at different price points, whether it's a barcode or RFID or Bluetooth or cellular technology or Wi-Fi. Certainly, as improvements are made in technology and price points come down, we have the ability to do even more with some of the higher end technologies. But as I said, they're all means to an end. And what is really necessary is to take that data and put it into some sort of platform that can make sense of that information and ultimately drive towards solving for some sort of business value, which requires having that either real time as well as historical data compared against what had occurred before. Or maybe you have no information from before, but you can compare from now going forward and start to see as your supply chain for these assets light up what actual improvements are being made on an operational side, as well as improvements from a business value standpoint, which goes to making sure that you're measuring the right things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from my vantage point, I just totally agree with Scott's, and I think that the technology is there's a lot of usable technology right now, and that I actually find that the issue there really have been very few situations where the technology was the limiting factor. It feels more to me like the limiter is the capacity of business owners to understand what is possible and how to turn that into something that matters. And so, you know, it actually feels like a lot of what we spend our time doing is helping businesses understand what is possible and just how to apply it, which is kind of unusual. I mean, it's a really, you know, I feel like these technologies are all pretty new, but even as new as they are, they're really capable. And there's just so much that can be done with what exists today that frankly, it's about imagination. I mean, I think imagination and an ability to connect what is possible to the problem that's occurring in a way that can actually drive obvious business value, because business owners don't want to. There are very few executives anyway that are there are absolutely some that are visionary, but most don't really have time to think much about what could be done as much as what's going to change the bottom line, what's going to drive corporate value. And so I just I'm thrilled with where the technology is, and I feel like going forward in the reusable packaging world, it's a lot about convincing shippers what can be done if they track stuff or if they trace stuff.
Well, that really speaks to the reason why someone would want to go down this road, and choosing wisely only the technology you actually need to solve a particular problem or to give you a particular set of data that you need for the business. And so I wonder if we shouldn't talk a little bit about, you know, the business case, where I know when we have these engagements, the hardest part really is to narrow the focus and not get sort of swayed by this really cool technology that can do 16 different things when you may only need a couple of those things. And so, you know, the challenge that we often have dealing with prospects and clients is to narrow the focus down to what is the business case you're trying to solve and what's the ROI. And so depending on what the issue is that you really need to get a handle on, it could be any number of different applications. And I know, you know, Scott Hurley had a few points of different types of applications and problems that are commonly solved. I wanted, Scott, if you could kind of run through those and just try to give us a sense of what the range of business problems are that this traceability technology is commonly used for.
Right. Thanks, Sean. So yeah, most companies come to considering this type of technology because they're trying to solve a problem. And more often than not, in my experience, that problem is asset loss. And that they either they're going somewhere, they don't know where they are, they can't find them anymore. So they're gone, they've just disappeared, or they're being stolen. And depending on the assets or the packaging, it could be a couple of dollars or it could be thousands of dollars per asset. And so what we've seen is that through the type of technology we discussed before, that many customers can be very happy with the initial return on, if you know in real time where your assets are, you can solve 50 to 75% of asset loss in the right context. You know, if someone's being very clever about stealing, it's a little bit more difficult. But just understanding where your assets are is a strong return on investment as it is. But what we found is that by lighting up their supply chain with this information, this data allows you to see so much more about your supply chain, and it becomes almost exponential, the ROI that ultimately you can receive, to include increasing asset utilization. So by understanding the dwell time, how long it's taking or your assets are remaining idle at different locations within you or your customer supply chain, and by understanding why you have dwell time there and reducing it, then you can do more with less. And so you can either reduce the amount of overstock that you have, which is nice if you have it, but each additional asset costs money. And if you're leasing that, you can reduce leasing costs. Or if you own it, then going forward, you don't need as many because you have increased your utilization of your existing assets. And in today's supply chain restricted environment, you may not even have all the assets that you need. If you cannot ship your goods to market through the assets necessary to do that, then you're not going to be making any money. So the more you can utilize the assets that you do have, the better off your bottom line. So that speaks to increased cycle time and velocity or throughput of your supply chain. The quicker you can move things through and get it to market or to shelf, the more money you're going to make. A really powerful additional benefit is stopping revenue leakage by identifying unauthorized usage of your assets. So if it's supposed to, for example, in the produce industry, if you're lending or leasing RPCs to a grower, and the grower fills it up with produce, sends it to a store, if it's supposed to come back to the leaser every time, but instead it's going back and forth to the grower, then they are not being billed. And so by identifying that usage, you can make sure that you are billing for it and recover a lot more revenue. There's also reducing demurrage and detention fees, especially for bigger assets, so like containers and tanks within ports, either detention fees because they're within a port for a long amount of time and you're paying for that space and you don't necessarily know why or didn't realize they were staying there, or demurrage fees are if it's a trip lease, for example, and it's supposed to take a week and it's now taking a month, you're paying a lot more for that tank, maybe even twice or 3 times more. So just by understanding dwell time and reducing it, you save a lot of money. And then the final is automating inventory count. So if you need assets and they may be spread all over the world, you no longer need someone to go out and count how many of each individual reusable asset that you have in a particular location. You can just query the system and you can see the ones that you have and their status and their condition. So all told, we've seen it can be a greater than 10x return on investment through the application of this tracking technology.
Of course, that's assuming you have people who know how to analyze that data and can take action based on it, which is not always a small thing. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
Well, I think, there's an additional layer of challenge here, which is that being able to take, I agree with everything Scott just said in terms of sort of key issues that can be solved with asset tracking, but it's really figuring out how does that play into the strategy of a company. One is always reducing cost. Absolutely. And for many companies, that's really key. But, there's also, how does it become a strategic issue? How do you get to, because the supply chain guy, the transportation guy, no disrespect for anybody that's in those positions, but often they're not the one that are signing contracts. And to the extent that you can go beyond, you can start with the folks that are feeling those specific pains, but really understand how do those pains fit into a broader strategy for the company, such that it matters to a CFO or a COO or a head of sales. If you can translate all of the issues that Scott just laid out into a compelling case for customer satisfaction, or a COO for how can you improve process? How can you really fix the recurring patterns that are driving some of those things to happen? And how do you, in some cases, affect relationships with customers or supply chain partners to figure out how everybody wins? Because there's a lot more if you can really get to the impacts or the implications of what Scott's just described.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, yeah, in summary, thinking about the impact on what traceability for reusable packaging is going to and should hit either the income statement or the balance sheet. And if we can talk to the right people and help them understand it, it's either, you summarize, going to increase revenue, or it's going to decrease costs, or it's going to actually decrease the number of assets you need to have, need to get your job done. So I think it can have those efficiency, balance sheet, and so these are real executive decisions that right now the reusable packaging organization can bring to companies with traceability.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it sort of goes to the next point, which is, how do you get started? Let's say somebody in an organization, and it could be either a supply chain person or an inventory management person for reusable packaging, or a production person who's having shortages of the packaging that will allow them to increase production and keep a smooth production schedule. Let's just say that somebody brings that to the table and they want to get started. What's the best way to do that? I think, for us, when we have a conversation like that, we're often starting with the business case, like what are the problems you're trying to solve? What are you trying to accomplish? And then identify the technology, the minimum technology that they would need. And for us, we're a platform company, and so we tend to think about things like a software development firm would, in terms of using an agile process of execution. And so we look at a minimum viable product. What is the minimum you need to get started, to at least get the first data necessary to solve that problem? And then what else do you need to build on to that? And so depending on what the needs are, we identify technology to go with that. And then we look at, if we can't provide it, who are partners who can? And I'm just curious, each of you kind of handle a different part of this. And I know that not one company can solve all the needs. And usually if you have a device, you need to connect to a platform. If you have a platform, you might need to connect to an app or device or some data plan out there. What do you suggest when people want to get started with this, how you sort of decipher the amazing array of technology out there, and companies too, that offer a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and it's really hard to know if who you're talking to has a complete solution. And generally, I know you guys can probably put together a complete solution, starting with your own technology and building out relationships. Is that how you do it? Anybody want to take a shot at that?
I can. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott, please.
All right. Yeah. So two things. You had mentioned putting requirements together. So it's really key, no matter where you start, is to at least understand your basic requirements. And number two, how are you going to measure your success of your MVP of your project? And so we drive quite a bit, into kind of how to measure it. And then I think, in my advice is, it really doesn't matter. Like, you take the panel here, just get started. Start with one of us, and then the other ones will bring in the right partners. And this is what we've proven through because the nice thing about this ecosystem is that there's a lot of people talking to each other. And so if you just get started and say, okay, I'm going to start here, and if it's start at the cloud or start at the edge device, we're going to bring it together, because ultimately I'm at the edge device. If I don't get the customer to get the data to be able to see it, I know that we won't actually sell more edge devices. And if somebody's really driving the application in the cloud, they're like looking for the right partners that it's going to be easy to integrate with. So you automatically have an ecosystem that's trying to find the right partners to work with to solve these problems. And so my advice is don't get too caught up on, if you've got a reference where somebody else is using somebody, or somebody, just get started and say, hey, let's go. And then and because if you try to solve it all internally and try to figure it all out, I guarantee you don't have the right resources to do it. I guarantee you that you don't have the bandwidth, and I guarantee you're gonna, it's just gonna be in the wrong direction. So pull in one of the experts and just get started.
Good thought. Scott?
So at Roamby, we sell subscription to a capability, not to a particular device based on what you want. But the reality is, and I think the biggest fear and the objections that many potential users have going in is that it is not a frictionless process to use any type of sensing device with an asset or a shipment, right? Someone actually has to physically either affix, embed, pair it, and then it needs to be somewhere on that asset, for example. And then that means that it's exposed to damage, it's exposed to the cleaning process, it's exposed to theft, things like that. And then you need to think about where is it going in terms of geography, and do you have the connectivity if you're sending it to South Africa or Ethiopia or parts of India? It's easy if it's all within the United States, for example, but if it's a global, do you have the right connectivity at the where you need it, as well as do you have the certification? So if you're using an IoT device, in some parts of the world, unless that country has actually physically inspected and given you the right certification to do it, then you can't use it. So and it's up to whoever you choose to work with to make sure that they understand what your needs are and try to make it as frictionless as possible and educate, make sure that whoever is required as part of the process has both the training on what it takes to use them and as well as the understanding as to why it matters, right? Because otherwise it's just one more thing that I got to do in my day, and it's likely to not occur, or they get lost or broken, etc. And so I think being forthright and making sure that they understand what does take and why is necessary to use these is important to setting the right expectations.
Yep, good points. Tim, what do you think? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you got to have, I agree with both of you that you just got to get out there and talk to people, because there's a ton of solutions. There's a ton of angles to come at these problems, and it helps to be a little bit familiar and also to figure out what you do and don't want any part of. I also think just internally, understanding what you're really trying to do and making sure that it matters, probably to more people in your organization than you. If you're a supply chain person, making sure that you understand how this is going to hit the bottom line, and frankly, how your own company is going to make a decision about it. Because, we're talking about new capabilities that few companies really know how to evaluate. It's not something that your company has probably ever bought before. So you better have some idea of how are you going to decide? Because if the other people out there, the potential vendors and partners, are going to help you to really come up with a solution that matters, you're going to need to know what you really are trying to accomplish and what you're going to be able to turn into reality. So I guess I would just add to the conversation to look within and look beyond just kind of your own purview as it relates to a project like this, because it's probably going to affect a number of different people and have benefits for a number of different people.
It's a great point. I think, one of the lessons that we learned kind of the hard way is to assemble an internal team that represents each department that you think is going to be impacted one way or the other, which is typically, depending on what the asset is and where it's going to be traveling and the type of product that's on it, it could be someone from production, someone from inventory management, as far as the reusable packaging assets, someone from the financial side somewhere, because they're going to have to reconcile the payments and the benefits and the ROI. and then whoever's really the feet on the street that's going to be, like Scott Hurley said, physically applying the device or attaching it. You got to have someone in operations, I suppose, who's going to be in charge of deploying this technology. And there's a lot of physicality to that. So, and aside from that, once you figure out who should be on that team, then I think very smartly, as Tim said, you need to figure out what the decision-making process is going to be, who's got the final sign-off, who's going to review it and make sure it checks all the boxes for all those departments and you're all on the same page before, and then who's going to pull the trigger. How do you make that decision and what are the factors there? So really great points there where you've got technology implications, financial implications, and team and organizational implications that you have to actually decide. So I think we're just about out of time, and I just wanted to wrap up, with anybody who has any final thoughts that we didn't cover. For me, I think we've kind of settled on a rounded sort of presentation where we think about the technology itself, what's involved. We think about the ecosystem it fits in, what the business case is, defining the requirements around that and what you want to get out of it, and then thinking about who's going to be involved in that to make a good decision. Anybody else like to give a little wrap up or anything else you'd like to add? Scott Schwalbe?
No, I think just the only thing is, I mentioned a couple of times, is the technology's here, and it doesn't, just moving forward to figure out your application, I think is the tough thing, to make that first step, and you've got good people to work with, and on this panel and outside of the ecosystem. So,
All right, great, thanks. Mr. Hurley? You're on mute, though, I think.
On mute. So to emphasize again what others may have said already, we don't, as our company, we don't do proof of concepts anymore. We'll do proof of value, because we've already demonstrated throughout the marketplace, and the other companies here represented can do the same, that the technology works. So when you're thinking about this, I would say don't have this as sponsored by your R&D department or innovation department. Certainly it's fine to involve them, but I think you can see from the customers that we work with already that the technology works, and make sure you involve the actual business people and the operational people, because ultimately they're the ones that will be signing the check most likely, and that need to actually work with this, and they're the ones that are going to get the benefit out of it. But 5 years ago, was it everything working? No. Is it today? Yes.
Great, good point. Tim?
Dream big. There's a lot of technology out there and a lot of things that can be done.
Yeah.
So, if you start going down this path, talk to a lot of people and really figure out how you can change your business, because for the right companies, this technology can be game changing.
Yep, totally agree. Well, thank you all for participating in the panel, and thanks for watching. And you can always go to reusables.org to get more information about each of these companies and others like them. Thanks very much.